Welcome to Meet the Mailers, where print and direct mail leaders share ideas, strategies, and experiences that drive engaging and profitable mail. I'm Paul Bobnak for Who's Mailing What, a direct mail 2.0 company. And today I'm talking with Adam Lewenberg. He's the president of Postal Advocate, located in Framingham, Massachusetts. Now, if you have any feedback on today's program, leave it in the box below. Tap that like button to show support for the program and tap subscribe to be notified when we add new videos to the Who's Mailing What channel. Now, let's meet the mailers. Hey, Adam, how you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on the call on the podcast. We appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. So why don't we get started as we usually do here by talking about your background. Everybody has their own unique story about where they started off to where they are today. So what's your journey been?
So, right out of college, when I was 23 years old, I got a job with Pitney Bowes. This was in 1993, and sort of worked my way up through the ropes, handling major accounts for Pitney Bowes, and then went into some corporate affairs and managed multiple different product lines and data and analytics. And I was at a conference back in 2011, and all the mail vendors were there. It was out in San Diego. And the session was about what were people going to do when mail volumes declined? What were the next frontiers of mail, that the mailing industry was going to do? And, all the mailing vendors were at this exhibit and at this speech. And I remember hearing the ideas that people were coming up with, things like we're going to sell image and workflow solutions. We're going to sell printer maintenance contracts. We're going to sell like all these different services they were coming up with, things that we had tried at Pitney Bowes and failed. And I
Mhm.
just had my aha moment. I looked around the room and I said, there's no way this group of vendors is going to properly help the clients. And I said, what an opportunity to go represent the biggest clients and help them manage their mail spends. And so we started Postal Advocate in 2011, and it's been a great journey since then. And we're doing I think, some pretty cool things.
Mhm. So, the reason I wanted to have you on was exactly that, which is what a lot of people talking about, the last couple of years especially, are these onerous U.S. postage, U.S. Postal Service postage rate increases, right? Uh, Way above historical norms, which we'll, talk a little bit more about later. But uh, it's a perennial challenge. So related to that, can you give me like a brief rundown of Postal Advocate services for the clients?
So our goal is to help clients manage 100% of their mail spends. And some clients do all services and some do just a small part of it. But if you think about the mail that people run in their organizations, it falls into a couple different categories. They have the equipment and the postage of what they do in all their field locations. So in their corporate headquarters and any in-house production hubs, they might have field offices, they might have clinics, you know, administration offices, sales offices. We have clients that have one or two offices, and we have clients that have 3,000 offices. And that
Mm,
requires some oversight of all the mail equipment and the postage that goes through. So that's one segment. There's, you know, direct relationships people have with the Postal Service. So whether you're managing your permit input accounts for first class or marketing mail, whether it's business reply mail or premium mail forwarding or PO boxes, caller reserve services, there's like, millions and millions of USPS accounts that are
right.
typically fragmented in an organization. So nobody manages them. And so
Mm,
we provide central visibility to that and controls and expertise. And then the last is a lot of mail's outsourced. So whether it's outsourced to a print and mail provider or to a pre-sort service, even if it's done in-house, they're farming it to a pre-sort service to do that work. And again, some companies use one, two, three, 50 different organizations to manage this with
right.
no insights, analytics, processes. So we manage that as well.
Mm. And what verticals are you present in that, among your clients?
So our clients probably hit all verticals, depending on but we're definitely more prevalent in few that are probably the biggest because the highest volume mailers. So I would
Uh,
say financial services, banking, insurance, investing, that's, probably the biggest. And then the next one would be healthcare. And healthcare
mhm.
could be anything from like health systems to, health insurance to health networks. Like, we handle a client that has, a few thousand dialysis clinics or 1,000 prosthetic locations or nursing home chains or some of the biggest hospital networks. So it could be any of those.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. So, you've described postage as one of the largest unmanaged spend categories in most organizations, right? So, why does postage remain so invisible compared to other expenses? And what kind of practical steps should companies take to, you know, get control of it?
It's it's really interesting when you think about this. Like if you look at the industry of like auditors, companies that are go in and help people manage spends. And there are hundreds, if not thousands of companies that help people manage their UPS invoices, their electric invoices, their copiers, their whatever the category is, there are these cottage industries that help people manage those spend categories. And there are lots and lots of companies who focus on that. We're the only ones who focus it on mail because most of those other categories, someone can hand you an invoice and they say, okay, this is the details of what we do. And take my spend from UPS and here's a listing for the last year and go audit this, help me negotiate a contract, get me, refunds, whatever the case may be. In mail, it's fragmented. Like
Hmm.
nobody's got the visibility to it. Our biggest part of our job is going to find out where all those spends are for the client, building them the visibility in the dashboards of where all this stuff is. And what's interesting is mail is huge. Like
Yeah.
there's $90 billion of postage. There is at least 80 to $100 billion in outsourced print and mail spends. There's a whole industry, there's hundreds and or thousands of companies that do these services. There's equipment providers, there's pre-sort services, like all in, it's somewhere between 150 and $200 billion spend that we're doing just in the US, and very few clients have their arms around it. And when I say very few, I'm talking even the biggest banks, the biggest healthcare systems, they don't have controls in place to manage this.
Right. How about do they have like a lot of internal mail experts?
No. Now, what's happened in the industry is there's very few. Like, I mean, if anyone here is like in the postal community and they've been to, a postal council meeting in a local area or
Mm,
gone to a regional show or even gone to the National Postal Forum, they're not that well attended. Like there aren't
mm.
that many mail experts. And the reason is because people retired. Like mail
Yeah.
is not sexy. Like so
Mm,
people have left the industry, companies have outsourced it to third parties, and there are very few people on the client side managing this.
mm. I mean, to me, it's such a gigantic issue because post, like both of us talked about, have gone up. They're the highest in the history of the Postal Service. They've gone up like what, 42 to 79% in the last 5 or so years.
And what's interesting, yeah, the high we've in the last 5 years, we've had, I think it was something like 8 or 9 different rate increases. And it's been
Hmm.
the highest rate increases in the history of the Postal Service, 42 to 79%. If you went to the previous 5 years, it was 1 to 21%, but as a comparison. Like never have we seen anything like this. And there are so few people that have the data that no one's even thinking about the fact that costs have gone up that much. So the way nobody has control of it is because people aren't screaming about these types of increases. The outsource industry is, certain key people who manage a production environment are, but but businesses as a whole don't even realize it.
Mm. So, what kind of steps do you do for your clients, and that other companies can do as well on their own to get control of all that?
So the biggest thing is to figure out like what data do people have to start out with, right? Like what do they know about who are they using for outsourcers? Where are their equipment agreements so we can track the work that's done in-house? And then how do we expand the scope to like other things that are happening? And to do that, we typically will go to like we'll go to their accounts payable department and
Mhm.
we'll have them pull invoices from key vendors. We'll take whatever data that we can get and we'll create portals access to their vendors. So whether it's they're mailing equipment providers like Pitney Bowes, Octane, Quadient, the stuff they do internally, whether it's USPS will build a business customer gateway login that links all their different CRIDs and like different account numbers so we can see
Mhm.
that. We'll get access to invoices from their outsourcers. And then we'll take all that data and plug it into a dashboard that the client can access. So
Mhm.
clients could do the same thing on their own. Most people would just be managing off a spreadsheet. The issue is that no one's developed an architecture besides us to be able to ingest all this information into a place in which it can be managed. And then once it's there, you need you need a team or a person that has some expertise to know what they're looking for. So just because the data is into a place, you need to know what are the tolerances, what are the areas that you look at to say, okay, that's an issue, that's an opportunity to drive savings.
Right. And then go on from there is keeping that data, constant look at it and sharing all that information with all of your vendors and your stakeholders and looking for other ways to reduce cost and have more savings.
Exactly. If that data is not maintained, it's great to do it as a one point in time. And at
Mhm.
best, we see clients maybe at one point looked at this category, but no one's maintaining this data. It has to be constantly like we update our data once a month, or like we go into all the vendor portals and we update all the spends once a month so we can keep this stuff relevant so we can follow changes in behavior and then drive different initiatives for the clients.
Yeah, gotcha. So, you pointed out that mail data and ownership are really often fragmented, across departments and vendors and locations. So, how does that translate into actual uh, financial leakage? And what does like a fully unified strategy look like in practice?
So that's, when we're dealing, some of our clients are some of the largest businesses in the country. And and even if they're not, companies are constantly adding locations, like acquiring companies, you know, closing, divesting. Like so it's this constant ebb and flow in corporate America. And the issue that we find is if there was a person in the company that was responsible for this category, they might
Hmm.
maintain this, but there typically isn't. So you might have like an internal company that has a corporate mail center or a production site in-house. But that person doesn't handle the spends that go on throughout the locations. They don't handle other divisions. They don't handle stuff that's outsourced. So they have visibility. So even if they're a production manager, they still only have visibility to a piece of it. So we find leakage in all places, even when, and I'll give some examples, maybe is the best way to do it.
Okay.
The internal stuff, leakage could be that people aren't taking advantage of the right postal discounts internally. They're
Oh, okay.
overpaying, they're overpaying on equipment because they're being oversold by their vendors. Nobody's claiming there's accounts that have been sitting in meters or in permits that nobody ever claimed, and the money sits and goes dormant and maybe gets lost. And we found millions of dollars in postage recovery. you know they're using the wrong services. They're not paying attention to they're mailing using services in the wrong ways, in the wrong mail classes. They're
Yeah.
submitting things to their mail houses in the wrong way, like in ways that makes it more expensive for them to process. It's every organization, no matter how good they are, has leakage. I can make that universal statement because we've never worked with an organization, no matter how big or sophisticated, that hasn't had significant leakage in one or few areas that we could identify.
Yeah. So the cost savings from a lot of these overpayments could be literally like millions.
Yeah, it can be in the millions, depending on someone's spend.
Well, what kind of a strategy can companies put together to, make an impact?
So, with or without us, like they can do this on their own. But the number one thing that we tell anyone is get access and visibility to your data.
Mhm.
Understand, like, how can you manage anything if you don't have the details to what you're sending? So, that is like, what is the equipment? What is the postage spends going through that equipment? What are the outsourced relationships? What are the volume? Where are the postage accounts? Get that stuff into some sort of manageable process so you have an inventory of what this is. And
Right.
what's interesting is you would think I'm going to give just hospital system, right? Like, and so the hospital you would think might have a corporate mail center. I'm going to use this as like a simplistic because we all have hospitals that service our local communities. But that hospital might be spending a few $1 million in postage and mail because they don't only have the main hospital mail center, they have a physician's practice that supports it, that has
Uh,
locations. They have they have annual fund development type work that they're doing. Every time a doctor leaves, they send out, our doctor is retired or moved or
right.
anything like that.
Right.
And so we find even simple hospitals might be spending a couple $1 million in postage using multiple different outsourcers across anywhere between 3 to 10 different separate departments orchestrating their own work.
Hmm.
So that's just like a simple example to show like in an
Sure.
organization that we all go to, that we have that same type of issue. So you need to get the visibility to the data and
Hmm.
then have someone on your staff that you're giving some controls to that knows something about mail. The biggest issue is not just the visibility, is that internally there typically isn't anyone who understands postal discounting, doesn't understand how to access the data, doesn't understand like what the mail class differentials are, to know what's even available to reduce costs.
Right.
So
So
have
essentially, that's
someone on staff that knows something.
right. And then have that decision making to be able to do something about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
there are a lot of cool things that are available. Like the post office is offering a growth incentive now that gives 30% refunds if you do more than 1 million pieces a year and you have any growth, you can get 30% of that growth back. We are all, as a country, every mailer in the country is footing the bill for that incentive. And we have
Hmm.
clients that are getting millions of dollars back on that because they're taking advantage of it. And the more people that take advantage of it, everybody else pays the bill because it raises everybody else's postage costs. Post
Right.
office feels that we're going to incentivize people that increase their mail volumes. But the point about bringing that up is it may not be that your actual volume is growing. It may be just that there are more things linked to you that we can pull together that makes it look like growth. And
Right.
we find that in lots of companies is that it's not necessarily just about growing, it's about the visibility and putting it in the right systems to be able to take advantage of these types of programs.
If they're eligible for it, they don't even realize it.
Yeah, they don't even realize it.
Right. Wow. That's something. And, theoretically, of course, too, is if you have all that visibility, you have all that data in the same place to look at it, you begin to look at it and say, well, maybe we don't need to do some of this, but we can strategize about other parts of our business and do something with mail that we didn't think about doing before.
Exactly. And
Right.
the biggest thing for people to think about is a good chunk of work. I would say if of the 90 billion pieces of mail that are done in the US, probably 75% of that work is outsourced. It's
Right.
outsourced to a third party, right? And this is the Wild West. Like people think like, oh, this is an organized industry, people pay a consistent rate. They don't. Because
Yeah.
most people don't know how to rate compare between one service into another. They don't bid out all their work. They don't have standards for how this is done. They don't know all the rules. So the outsourcer kind of dictates the dialogue, and
Mm.
how things work. And it's an area that needs to be looked at and viewed and managed because it's not only the $90 billion of postage, it's the extra 80, $100 billion in outsourcing spends.
Right.
We spend more on this area in the United States than we do in UPS and FedEx combined. And there is hundreds of companies who help people manage their UPS and FedEx spends,
Hmm.
but we're the only ones we found on the postal side.
Wow. Wow. That's crazy. That's something else. So, there's a paradox where mail volumes, as we've talked about, they're declining modestly, in a lot of ways, yet postage rates are rising significantly. So, how should organizations rethink their mail strategy in this environment, where you know, costs are going up fast, but volume is, on a little bit of a decline?
So It's interesting because of like some of the misconceptions of it. Like if you read the news, like every time there's a rate increase, people talk or like an article about the post office is insolvent because mail volumes are dropping so fast.
Right.
Like it's not necessarily the full scope of what's happening. So I just want to give like sort of a way you want to think about mail. So
Hmm.
90 billion pieces of mail that are done, in first class and marketing mail and sort of the main mail classes. If you broke out what's really going down, first class single piece, the letters you send to family, if you're working in an office, the amount of pieces that you're sending to your constituents, you know, manually, not in any sort of production manner,
Hmm.
that's going down by huge percentages because it's not convenient. We're emailing or we're doing other things.
Right.
But when
Yeah.
you look at the production mail, like, things that go through a pre-sort service or get automation discounts for first class, that's only going down
Transaction.
like 1 or 2% a year.
Right.
If you look at marketing mail goes down 1 or 2% a year, with the exception of if there's a big like issue. Like COVID, they went down significantly in COVID. 2007 in the real estate debacle, they went down by huge sums. And then that becomes the new norm. So they go
Hmm.
down and then it flattens. But
Hmm.
outside of those big issues, production mail volumes are going down very little. Post office has to keep raising rates. And like it's gonna upset some people on who listen to this. They're gonna have to keep raising rates. And it's our fault. It's our
Right.
fault because we mail less and we have more places they have to deliver. So every time they drop it into someone's mailbox, there are fewer pieces that they are getting revenue for. And so they're adapting to our changing mailing behaviors.
Hmm.
And so, and we have the lowest postal prices basically in the westernized world. If you were to go to
Right.
any other country, we
A
charge
lot more.
a fraction of what any other country charges. So, in order for the post office has zero, very limited controls to impact their rates, to impact their service standards, and so they're sort of locked in this like area where they're doing their best to try to meet these changing environments, but they have limited abilities to run themselves like a profitable business.
Right. Yeah, like the 6 day a week delivery, which is locked in by law for the last 4 or 5 years. I'm sure there's been, studies talking about how much money that would save by going to a 5 day delivery model.
And when they looked at that and they did public surveys, the public really didn't mind 5 day delivery. Like the majority of people were okay with it. But in I think 70, I read something, I think 71% of postal routes or post offices are underwater. Like they're not covering their costs. But we
Right.
still have this universal standard where everybody gets postal access. So I'm not saying that we need to change that. There are a lot of people who need to get access, even if they're in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. They always use that example. Or like the top of the mountain in Alaska, they still get
Hmm.
the same postage rates as we get in big cities. And but it's not an easy model to run that business in a declining volume.
Right. Well, that's, I guess, where, companies like yours come in because you can, create a framework for better controlling your spending and making sure that your costs are all optimized.
Exactly. And so you can bank on, whatever you are for a business, you can bank on 5 to 10% annual increases. In some years, it may go
Hmm.
higher. And the only way to offset that, besides mailing less, is to look for strategies to reduce costs. And there are a lot of them. There's, 30 to 50 different ways that we find for clients that they can reduce the cost of mail. And
Hmm.
it's just understanding what's available.
Hmm.
And most businesses have only had access to what they do. We've had access to hundreds of businesses, so we can see it from a different perspective.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, you push back on this narrative that, mail is dying, arguing that it's evolving, which I absolutely agree with. So, where do you see the biggest disconnect between perception and reality? And how should marketers and mailers adjust their spending to, deal with that?
The interesting thing, I think over time, mail volumes for first class may keep going down. There's regulation that's in place that could reduce first class statement and invoice, like obligations for people to send things, and
Hmm.
that could make a dent. I don't think marketing mail, I think, is going to be around for a long time because there aren't that many ways to reach people anymore. Like
Right.
we all watch TV, but we watch streaming services that have limited commercials unless we're watching sports. We know very few people listen to the radio to the same levels we listen to Spotify, which doesn't have commercials. Like, email marketing, like people delete or it goes to spam folders and, banner ads that are in things, people figure out ways to delete. My point is there isn't as many ways to reach people. So like by getting a physical piece in someone's hands that they have to do something with, is still going to be an attractive medium for response rates into the future. So I don't think mail is dying. I think it's declining. I think it needs to be used in more targeted ways and more
Mhm.
cost-effective ways. But I think it's a medium that will have a slow, progressive reduction over multiple years and, will still be used in the next 10, 20, 30 years, to support different initiatives that people have.
Right. And I think too, all those, everything that you mentioned is electronic, and people as it is with, this attention span, which is already divided up in 1,000 different ways, and then it's 1,500 different ways, and in 2,000 different ways, with all of the electronic channels that continue to take more and more and more. But then you have, a physical piece of mail, which has, different characteristics that, get people's attention and keep them moving along instead of spending time with anything else that you mentioned, the other electronic channels.
And the pieces that drag people from a physical piece of mail to an electronic experience, where they can do,
Hmm.
whether it's QR codes or whether it's, offers that take them to certain websites,
Hmm.
that are personalized, those are, what proves to have the highest success and response rates. We're not saying that everything should be in a physical environment. It's the
Of
physical
course.
bringing you
No,
to the
no.
digital.
Hmm. So looking ahead, this might be kind of a loaded question, but considering pricing pressure, service changes, shifts in regulations, uh, what should organizations be doing now to future-proof their mailing operations?
I would say like staying engaged with what's actually happening inside your organization, understanding the types of mailings that you're doing, like following some of the regulations to see what can be eliminated, because over time there are going to be pieces that can be eliminated, making sure that you're taking advantage of promotions, incentives, discounts, ways to reduce costs, getting rid of waste, like, things that you wouldn't believe how much money people spend in equipment in offices that are doing fractions of like volumes of postage that just don't justify it, spending 10 times more on equipment than the postage being run,
Mm.
because no one's thinking or looking at it. You know,
Right.
just having a structure around managing the spend, but looking for ways to do things for less money. And but I would say staying engaged in what are the best practices around automation, best practices around success rates, response rates, being able to mail more efficiently, taking advantage of the best tools and insight that is available.
Hmm. Gotcha. That sounds like a great plan to me. Uh, so before wrapping up, one question I always have for my guests on Meet the Mailers is, what's one direct mail piece that you may have received recently that really made you stop and pay attention as you're going through it, and maybe even nerded you out about, what it was?
So um, we get different catalogs at our house, but I got one last week from Sweetwater, which is a company I haven't bought from before, which sells, musical instruments and gear and stuff like that. I play guitar,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was like, oh.
Oh,
So
okay.
I looked through every page of this catalog. I probably spent 5 or 10 minutes looking through this thing because I was like, I want to see what they have available. And now I know that Sweetwater is a company that I should be thinking about if I want to buy something. Um, versus the local places I typically go to. So I thought that was interesting. But the point is, it had my attention for a long period of time, and I thought,
Hmm.
that's pretty effective. If I can target it, if I can target something to something that someone really wants or is interested in, like paper is still a very fun method in which to search that.
Right, right. And I think, their combination for a lot of catalogs, especially, is using the content of that. It's kind of like a showcase as the intro for their website. So you can just uh, scan the QR code or just go over to their website and have everything that they have right there.
And I bookmark their website so I can look at,
Mhm.
if they're having sales or things like that.
Gotcha. Very cool. So at Who's Mailing What and Direct Mail 2.0, we're all about helping people with their needs and wants. And we've talked a lot about, some of that today. So how can people contact you and Postal Advocate about your solutions?
Best way probably is to go to our website, postaladvocate.com. And, there's a way for you to reach out to not just me, but to different members of our staff. And we're happy to help. For clients who need, assessment work, for many clients, we would do a no-cost assessment to pull together all these different mail spends to give you a view and then show you what opportunities they have before we ask anyone to commit.
Great. Cool. Well, thanks so much again for being here today, Adam. It was very cool to have you. And thank you all out there for joining us today. Remember, questions and feedback are always welcome. Tap those like and subscribe buttons. And if you want to be highlighted in a future edition of Meet the Mailers, please reach out. My contact info can be found in the box below by tapping Show More. And we'll talk about how we can showcase your company, your solutions, and your thought leadership. Thanks again for watching Meet the Mailers, and see you here next time.